Hey there, welcome to this episode of Speaking of. Today we're speaking of the Kevin McCarthy speakership. If you've been following the news here, really over the last 2 days in the United States, and it's kind of been leading up to this for a little while, but really the last couple of days, this has been an increasingly uh, significant and I think even bizarre story that is taking place in Washington, D.C., where essentially the Republican Party is trying to choose their next leader they're trying to choose the Speaker of the House. So the Republicans took control of the House back in November, but they did so by a very narrow margin. And what that means is that the Republicans now have to choose the Speaker, and the Speaker is it's a very, very important position, and for reasons why I'll explain in just a moment. But they're trying to choose the Speaker of the House, who will lead them particularly over the next 2 years. And why the reason this is making news, other than just sort of a brief mention, is that they voted, I think, at this time already 6 times, and they've not yet been able to actually get enough people to approve of his speakership. And so it's becoming a bigger and bigger story. Now, and so what I want to do, I want to just explain a little bit, give you some more background on what's going on, why this is important. And then I want to see if we can peel back some of the layers and look a little bit deeper at some of the underlying issues. And then I want to kind of bring that into some theological reflection on how do we evaluate this as Christians. So why is this important, especially if you're not from North America, or if you're not from the United States? You might wonder, why is this such a big deal? Well, the Speaker of the House is the second. He's number two in line, or she is number two in line for the presidency. So you have the president, and should something happen to the president, then you have the vice president, and should something happen to the vice president, then the Speaker is next in line. And so obviously it becomes a very significant position just for that reason. But more importantly, I suppose you could debate that. But the other aspects here is that the Speaker of the House is really the one who sets the agenda for the House. What are they going to debate? What's going to go on the agenda? What laws should they focus on? What bills should they focus on? That sort of thing. And then it's their job as Speaker to sort of rally the party behind that agenda and really get it done. And so, without going too much into the details of the American political system, the party who holds the majority really gets to set the legislative agenda. And it's always interesting when you've got when the presidency is held by the person of a different party. So you've got one person who's in the presidency of one party, and then the House is controlled by the other party. That often creates some tension and conflict, and often it can create gridlock because the House doesn't want to do what the presidency would prioritize, and so there's this kind of tension with that. But the point is that the Speaker of the House gets to set that agenda. They get to decide what to focus on. The other thing is that the Speaker controls the committee assignments. And so, in Congress, you've got all these different positions on committees and things. And so some committees are very, very powerful, like the House of the Ways and Means Committee. Others are less so. And so who gets to sit where rests with the Speaker of the House. And so you can imagine how that position holds an enormous amount of power and influence. And because they can decide how to allocate the real will and wishes of the party. And that's what's really at stake here. You've got a party trying to figure out who's going to hold, which individual is going to hold this position, and who's going to hold, by extension, then who's going to hold that sort of power. Now, another twist in all of this is that the House cannot do anything. They cannot conduct any business until they have elected a Speaker. That is a constitutionally mandated requirement. And so until a Speaker is chosen, there will be no action on the floor of the House. And so there's this urgency to try to choose somebody so that the House then can get on with the business that they have in front of them. This year, just based on the numbers of this term, I should say, there needs to be 218 people, 218 votes for an individual in order for that individual then to be chosen and elected into the House. Normally, this is a pretty straightforward vote. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of closed door meetings and things. And by the time you get to this point on the calendar, a speaker has been identified, a person that's going to be speaker, and they haven't voted on it yet. Nothing is official, but generally speaking, the party has agreed on who will be their speaker, and then all they have to do is vote on it. But for the first time in 100 some odd years, the speaker was not chosen on the first balloting. Normally, they do a roll call and people would vote, and by the time everyone had voted, you'd have the speaker decided, and they haven't done that as of today. Today is January 4th. The House has adjourned already. I understand they're going to be meeting later this evening, but they are up to the 6th balloting. And so what they do is they vote, and if they can't decide on someone, then they kind of go back. People make more speeches. They do more stuff behind doors, and people can offer to make deals, and there's all kinds of brokering that happens, and they vote again, and then, okay, nothing happens, so they vote again, and it's gone on now 6 times, and still there has been no decision. Now, this year, there are, as I said a little bit ago, there are 222 Republicans that have been elected to the House. And so if you only need 218, you can do the math. You can recognize that if you get 218 people from your party, and you've got 222 people from your party, and so that means you can even lose 4 of them to vote for who would vote for someone else and still gain the speakership. So there should be enough votes within the party to elect this person, but there haven't been. I think he's short they've done it a couple times. I think he's about 18 to 20 votes short. And that's because within the Republican Party, you've got this small block of voters, a group of about 12 to 15 voters who have kind of rallied together, and they're steadfastly refusing to vote for them. Now, by the way, I should add here, I'm simplifying things here. There are other issues at play. Some people, it's been reported, they just don't like Kevin McCarthy. They think he's power hungry. They don't think he's conservative enough. They think he's too conservative, whatever. But in most of the time, that all gets set aside, and the party will then vote on their leader. They can kind of set aside these petty things, but that's not happening this time. And that's more because you get this block of very, very conservative Republicans. They are some, depending on how you look at it, they'd be the more right wing, or the ultra right wing, or some people would call them the MAGA conservatives. I'm not sure that's always a fair analysis, actually, but that's sometimes what they're called. About half of this group, but if you take, I think there's about 15 to 20 of them. I forgot to count exactly how many, but about half of them it is reported that they are election deniers. They were the ones who denied that Trump legitimately won the election back in 2020. Now, it gets more complicated than that. It's not as simple as saying, well, they're all deniers, because actually you get this sort of, a group of them is this pretty heavily right-wing conservative group of people. And among them, you've got a founder of this I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it's the Liberty Caucus or the Freedom Caucus. I think it's the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus was founded by a guy by the name of Jim Jordan, who's a congressman and a very conservative one. And you've got, and so he founds this Freedom Caucus that's kind of like the ultra right wing part of the Republican Party. And the interesting thing that's happening is that these people who are not voting for Kevin McCarthy are actually voting for Jim Jordan. But Jim Jordan has said, I don't want the position. He's actually voting for McCarthy. In fact, now, and so that's one interesting thing. You've got the people, you've got these ultra right wing people within the Republican Party voting for Jim Jordan, and Jim Jordan is saying, no, don't vote for me, even though I think ideologically like you. Instead, you should be voting for Kevin McCarthy. Here's the other interesting thing. Kevin McCarthy has been criticized by many people on the left as being an election denier. And there's some evidence to say that early on he actually was in that camp, but he actually changed that later on. He did come out fairly soon after the 2020 election, and he did affirm that Trump did win the election legitimately, and he denounced the events of January 6th of 2021. But there's that dynamic at play here. Now, here's why I bring that up, because there's been another name that has been floated by the Democrats to be the speaker, and so the Democrats get to vote too, and they've been voting for a person by the name of Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries is a very liberal, very progressive congressman, and he had tweeted at least 2 times on 2 occasions that the 2016 election was stolen. And that's important because you get people on the left who look at people on the right, and like Jim Jordan and even Kevin McCarthy, and they say, well, you should never support them because they are election deniers. And yet the irony is that they are also supporting someone who's made comments that suggest that Trump won the 2016 election illegitimately. Here's the final wrench in the works. Trump himself, so you get this group of ultra right-wing people who are sort of the strong supporters of Trump. Half of them are election deniers and say Trump won the 2020 election. But now even Trump has supported Kevin McCarthy. Trump has come out actually and says, you've got to get behind this guy because you've got to unite the party, essentially. And so that's just a weird dynamic to me, because you've got this ultra conservative group of people who are supporting Kevin McCarthy, who are being told by the person that they admire to support Kevin McCarthy, and they're not doing it. So it's really a strange kind of mess. Now, what does this all mean? What sense do we make out of all of this? I think there's a couple things, and it sort of depends on which side of the spectrum you are politically, socially. First of all, if you are a conservative person, if you tend to lean conservative, this should concern you, because I think, number one, it reflects rather poorly on conservative politics. It's showing a fairly fractured party, and it's going to mean that over the next 2 years, you've got this window of time. I'm thinking purely strategically, you've got a window of 2 years of time in which to push a more conservative agenda. But a fractured party will not be able to do that. And so strategically, this is sort of a yellow flag. This is a caution, I think. I think it reflects some very strong divisions within the Republican Party. And I think all this is going to make it fairly difficult to get the job done. And so if you're a conservative, the tendency is sort of, especially if you tend to lean more conservative, the tendency would be to say this is a really good thing because you've got these people who are, they're rallying for their cause and that. But I think it's actually having the opposite effect. Now, if you are a progressive person, I think you also have some things that you ought to be really attentive to and really concerned about. And one of them being that there is this contradiction here. On the one hand, you want to denounce the people on the far right for being election deniers. You want to denounce people like Kevin McCarthy, and you want to denounce people like Jim Jordan. But at the same time, the party is supporting people like Hakeem Jeffries, who also denied the 2016 election. The other one is maybe it's not as relevant here, but Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary for the White House, also has tweeted that Trump stole the election. And so I think you've got this paradox here it's sort of like, on the one hand, you want to denounce election deniers and not give them any authority and not give them any legitimacy, but then you have to look at it in your own house as well. And I think this is actually revealing that. Joe Biden said about the election deniers, they do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And that's all well and good, but then you'd better make sure that you are looking in the mirror and acknowledging that it's in your own house as well. Now, let's go a little deeper in this. If you are a person of faith, if you are a Christian, how do you think about this? What sense do you make of it all? Actually, and I can't tell you what position to take on it. I can't tell you, my point here is not to say as a Christian you should support McCarthy or not. That's far beyond the scope of what I think I can say on this. But here's what I can point out, and here's what I think is important. What is happening here reflects a greater trend in our broader culture, which is a trend towards heavy tribalism. We identify our own tribe, right? Which group are we like? And interestingly, our tribe can get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? You get the party, and then you get the caucus, and then you get a smaller caucus. And which is an interesting phenomenon to me. It just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But what we do is we not only do we identify ourselves ideologically with that tribe, with that group, but we view the other person or the other group or the person in the other group not just as someone that we have differences with, but we denounce them as the enemy. Spiritually speaking, what is happening is we are building our identity on the group to which we belong, whether it be Republican or Democrat. And by the way, both sides do it. This is not a left thing that people on the left do, or it's not a thing that people on the right do. Both sides do it. Our identity is then rooted in our political position or our social ideology or the group that we are a part of. And what we're doing is we're finding our righteousness in that. We're saying this makes me a good person. This makes me a patriot. This makes me, someone who's passionate about the needs and the concerns of the poor and the downtrodden and the oppressed. This makes me passionate about justice. And then we tend to ignore our own blind spots, and that's why I think it's important to point out that people on the left have denied the election as well. They've done the exact same thing because they become blind to their own blind spots. They downplay them. People on the right do it. People on the left do it. And then you demonize your opponents. You speak terribly of them. You criticize them. And this is not anything new. This has been going on for a long time in American politics. And I think it's something that as Christians we need to be very wary of. Your righteousness does not come from the group of which you are a part. Your righteousness does not come from the positions that you hold. Right? As a Christian, you say, my righteousness comes from Christ. My sense of rightness and goodness is drawn from my relationship with Jesus. And that actually frees you up then. Then you can hold to your positions, but you have no need to demonize the other person. You have no need to put yourself on a pedestal. You have no need to go to war to defeat the other person, because you realize they're not the enemy. They're just someone who has a different viewpoint, different vantage point from you. I got this. I think I can probably share this here. I got this. I saw this on a friend of mine's Facebook feed, and he put up this cartoon, and this is exactly what happens. Right? It used to be once upon a time. You get the extremes here. You get the conservative extreme. You get the extreme on the left and the extreme on the right. You'd have communism and you'd have like Nazism. That's sort of the ultra unacceptable extremes. And then you get sort of, I think it describes it well here: left-leaning, progressive, militant, and then communist. And then you have right of center, right wing, far right. So you get sort of nuance within that, but now what it's showing here now, I think it's only showing it for the for people who are on the right, looking at how people on the left view them, which is politically uber correct. You're woke. We talk about that, and then you get everyone else who's racist, Nazi, misogynist, deplorable people, degenerate, subhuman people. I think, to be fair, you probably could do the same thing and reverse it, but the cartoon doesn't do that. In any case, that's what we see happening, and I think that ought to be a concern for us in public life. This does not bode well for cultural flourishing. The other thing I think to pay attention to is that is the way that power is being misused. I think what you're seeing here is an extreme power struggle. And again, we could talk about this on both sides of the aisle. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a conservative issue. It's I think it's a broader social concern, and that is that power. You see people jockeying for power. It was said that McCarthy, even before this, was making all kinds of promises and commitments just to secure these votes, and in the process, he was sort of humiliating himself because he's really giving away everything just to gain that power. And then what would they do? What the people would do with it, and it really became a mess. So, I think we have to ask ourselves, in American public life, American politics, is power something that we use for personal advancement, personal gain, party gain, or have we made an idol out of power? Have we made an idol out of gaining and grabbing and holding on to as much power as we can for the benefit of our own side? Or do we, and to what extent do we use power as a way of serving the common good, as a way of serving the public good? If you the problem is, over the past years, the pendulum just keeps swinging back and forth, but it goes further one way or the other as each side fights for power and gains it, then they lose it, and then the other side seems to react strongly, and back and forth we go. And I think this has a lot to do with our hunger for power. And at least a person of faith has to say, biblically speaking, power is not a bad thing. Power is a necessary thing. Power is a good thing, but power is to be used as a stewardship. It's to be used to serve, and that's a radically countercultural message. And it's something that we see less and less of. But I think it's something that that from a Christian point of view, that's what we ought to be seeking. Thanks for watching. As always, good to have you along as we think through these issues. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear more of your take on it. And we'll catch you next time on when we do Speaking Of.